Resident Evil Village is my second game into the Resident Evil franchise, with my first game being RE7. After playing through that game, I was looking forward to playing this one as it's a continuation of the story with Ethan. And after playing this game, I have to say I enjoyed it a lot and had a great time with it. There was a lot I think it did well, and it had a few shortcomings, but enough rambling, let's jump right in. When replaying this game, I decided to play through it in third person mode because in my first playthrough I had already played through it in first person mode on my initial run of the game. So I figured why not feel the difference playing the two modes, and I have to say for a game as combat oriented as Village is, I think third person is the way to go here. Not to say that first person is necessarily bad, but I think it doesn't work as well as it did in 7, where in that game it works wonders because of it being a true survival horror experience. Boss fights can work well in Village, but for few bosses, it didn't really work in third person. So let's talk about Ethan Winters in this game. Ethan himself has changed and he is trained in fighting now. Not to mention the power of angry father energy, he'll do whatever it takes to get his daughter back. There's also Chris being a dickhead to Ethan until the very end of the game, in which the second time when we run into Chris in Moreau's fight, we already took down Dimitrescu and Benevento, so Ethan was already doing more than Chris. Now, to be fair, I haven't played any of the games featuring Chris as the main protagonist yet, so I'm not sure what caused him to be this way. Anyway, the story of Village is fine, and it's nothing crazy you'll go over, which is something you get used to in Resident Evil games, at least for me. I loved Ethan in Resident Evil 7 for being the everyday man, and in Village, he's different as in he doesn't have time to play around. The way he moves in this game is crazy because he pulls a Batman through doing everything in less than a day. Ethan, I saved the franchise winters. One could say it was the only winter Miranda couldn't handle. But I digress. Let's move on to the setting and atmosphere of Resident Evil Village. The setting of Village is quite interesting as it's not a dark, disgusting residence like the Baker's house in RE7. It's quite the contrast from what was in Resident Evil 7, but I think it's a nice change, and this game also lives up to its name as you are dealing with evil residents in a village. Until you aren't, but more on that later. I really like the opening hour of the game, which begins with you exploring the house while carrying Ethan's daughter, Rose. There's some cool things to learn about here, such as Ethan doing some military training that's implied when examining a firearms instruction manual on how to handle a gun. So Ethan has had training from Chris to deal with any monsters coming his way. Suddenly you get captured and Chris shoots your wife, and then you're navigating on your way through the dark, head into a village, then deal with hordes of Lycans while being low on ammo, and it's fairly terrifying at first. Something about exploring a village overrun by Lycans is intriguing as you never know when or where they'll show up. While it isn't as scary or intense as RE7's opening hour, I still think it's a solid opening of the game, and as you learn what is happening around the context of Village. One thing that makes Village different from most RE games is that it's not really as survival horror based as other games. Part of it is the intentional reduction of horror elements because fans complaining about how scary RE7 was, and thanks to how generous this game is supplying you with resources. Normally you conserve your resources so that you can reserve them when you absolutely need to use it, but in Village you can let loose most of the time and you'll conserve ammo every now and again, but it's not as necessary compared to Resident Evil 7. The horror also isn't as strong in this game since it's more action focused this time around, so it's more of a thriller if anything, which is something I don't mind because I think the combat works well here thanks to how responsive the controls feel and how satisfying defeating Lycans and such are. Village does have its moments with being scary and actually being a horror game in few instances. The general gameplay of Village is mowing down hordes of Lycans. Hell, there's few parts of the game where you actually have to do exactly that, and exploring around environments that lead to boss fights. I like the combat oriented gameplay of Village more, and as much as I love Resident Evil 7, the combat was serviceable but not my favorite to go through. If you're looking for something to scare you, then Village will be disappointing to you, but I personally think you can find enjoyment out of this game, and like I said, it has its moments which are few and far between. The villains of this game aren't evil possessed residents controlled by one entity like in 7. Instead, in Village, you're fighting mutated beings with supernatural powers. Your first encounter with them is really interesting as you're going through a running section death game. While it is scripted, it's a really interesting set piece and spectacle, and I wish we had more stuff like this with Heisenberg. I mentioned in my last video how each of the Bakers represented a different style of horror movies, like Jack being a slasher film, Marguerite being insect horror, and Lucas being similar to the Saw movies. However, with Village, all of the lords are supernatural beings that have special powers of their own. And let's start off with Lady Dimitrescu. She is the tall, sharp, mutated woman, and aside from her being hot, she is threatening. She is the only lord in the game who is a stalker-like killer, meaning that she roams around the castle while you're out and about exploring. This can make for some scary moments where she shows up out of nowhere, and this makes exploring Castle Dimitrescu exciting and fresh since there are many secrets to be found. It's a much more open space compared to the Baker's house, but it still does a good job of making you feel immersed exploring the area. Going from finding 4 masks, shooting bells to further explore the castle is all great stuff. There's also her 3 daughters that I don't even know their names to be honest, but they're there and you must kill them all to fight Dimitrescu. The daughters are nothing scary and are essentially just mini boss fights that can easily be taken out. While it is interesting using the cold against them, as that is their weakness, they're okay mini bosses, but again, nothing too crazy. After you fight the 3 daughters and find the 4 masks, you fight Dimitrescu as a dragon, and I have to say, this is a good boss fight, and it works better in third person here. It's a nice challenge with sniping Dimitrescu and taking any and every opportunity to defeat her. After you clear this boss, you can't go back to the castle for some bizarre reason. I understand why they did this so they can prevent unnecessary backtracking, but it would have been nice to explore the castle without the threat of being killed, as the castle is honestly the highlight of the game here, and it's so early, which lasts 2 to 3 hours. I really like the castle's contrast to the Baker's house, as the environment is night and day here. Anyway, after that, this is the place that terrified me, which is the dollhouse, or House Beneviento in this case. It's a very short part of the game here, but this is what I meant by Village having its moments of horror here and there. In the dollhouse, you enter the basement with no weapons and navigate through puzzles. After clearing those puzzles and the light goes out, suddenly a hideous baby monster is chasing you, and it is terrifying, not only because of not being able to fight it, but the sudden switch in gameplay too. Also ended up dying to this little shit, so that was fun. It doesn't end there, as you deal with hordes of dolls in this hide and seek game. And I'm going to be honest with you, dolls creep me out in real life, so I was stressed out doing this again on my second play. The dollhouse was really good, and I wish there was more horror stuff in this game, but well, it is what it is. Again, the dollhouse is really good, and it's the scariest part of Village easily. Next up is Salvatore Moreau, and he's a fish monster thing that you have a dedicated boss as you are draining a dam. You go through areas that can end up in you being swallowed by him while finding a crank to use to drain a dam, and like I said, actually fight him. His boss isn't too bad, yet my only complaint is how time consuming it can be, so you won't always be attacking him. I think it's a decent enough boss fight with fighting Moreau. He has some interesting attacks that you have to deal with, but overall it's an okay boss fight. Not one that I hate, but not one that I love either. Moreau's is a very short part of the game, and then there's Heisenberg, which has his own dedicated area to explore, which is the factory. But before you go through that, you have to go through 2 gauntlets of ligands and then fight the leader of them, Urias, which is the monster that attacked you in the beginning of the game when playing the death game run. As you fight him, this is one of the fights where third person really doesn't work well in. The arena is too small for the camera to have a proper distance on Ethan, so most of the time you'll be zoomed in on the back of Ethan's head. Regardless, I think it's a solid boss fight, and I'll go ahead and say the biggest strength of Resident Evil Village is the boss battles. They're not difficult, but they don't need to be. They're fun to go through, and I really like destroying the 4 lords in their home turf where Ethan kicked their ass one by one. As I mentioned Heisenberg earlier, let's talk about his area, the factory. The factory is a part I didn't enjoy in my first playthrough because I thought it was confusing to navigate through, but on my second playthrough I enjoyed going back to the factory as it's a dedicated area for one of the 4 lords similar to Dimitrescu's castle. Overall, I think the factory is a decent enough area and it feels like survival horror, even if it really isn't. I really like the horror it can have with a robot spawning out of nowhere. I think it's a well done area. Anyway, once we reach Heisenberg's fight, it's a tank fight, and I don't mind it. It's an okay fight, but I can see why people would find it disappointing. You hold the machine gun and use charge shots when you're given the chance. And then there's guarding with the tank itself, which negates attacks, so the tank portion of the fight is simple to get through. The rest of the fight is on foot, and you shoot Heisenberg down many times, and then after that fight you run into Miranda and she rips your heart out, so you switch to playing as Chris, and I have to say, playing through his part of the game was quite nice here in third person. It felt better playing the section than in first person, because you can actually see what's happening around you, behind you, next to you. It's a lot easier. But in Chris's section, you have to mow down enemies, destroy this molded structure, and find the real Mia, which isn't dead, as we were told that Chris shot down Miranda, who was disguised as Mia, to see what Ethan was capable of, or research him. The last stretch of the game is as Ethan, and we find out that we're molded and have been already dead since the beginning of Resident Evil 7, pretty much right when Jack Baker knocked us out. So we have a little time to defeat Miranda, and her fight is something alright. It's a fairly long fight as she has a lot of HP and morphs into different forms. The spider form is the most annoying one to deal with, no doubt. The other forms aren't so bad. She has many attacks that can be a little tricky to dodge, but they're overall not too bad. This one where she's using the spider where she jumps from above or she claws you is a little tricky to dodge, but you can guard, which is a nice alternative to dodging itself. Anyways, you continue to shoot her down with all the resources you have, and once you defeat her, that's the game, and after that is the ending, which is pretty sad, with Ethan sacrificing himself to save his daughter, who left with Chris at the end. If I'm being honest, I was emotional when clearing the game, and seeing Ethan's tombstone, I genuinely broke down in tears, cause Ethan did everything to fight for his daughter's safety. And all of this just for Capcom to hide his face for some weird reason. I understand not showing his face in 7 because it was a separate thing from what fans were used to, but in Village, Ethan had already become his own character, and by the end he was a true hero, an angry father killing 4 lords and a goddess on his own in less than a day. So maybe if Capcom showed his face at the end of the main story, or hell, even in Shadows of Rose, it would have been symbolic. And speaking of Shadows of Rose, they didn't even show it there either. So again, I have no clue why Capcom was so adamant on hiding Ethan's face. Even so, I love Ethan Winters as a protagonist in both Resident Evil 7 and Village, in which he was still alive, but it is what it is. Overall, Resident Evil Village is a really good game. Even while having less horror elements compared to RE7, I still enjoyed Village a lot with its plentiful action. However, I am a bit disappointed about the reduction in horror, but aside from that, I think Village is a great game. That's all I have to say about Village, and in my next video, I'll be talking about Resident Evil 2 Remake. So I hope you look forward to that, and be sure to like the video, and hey, why not subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. That's all I have to say, and as always, enjoy yourselves and have a good one.